This episode is brought to you by Spira Capital. Founded by 2008 Ron Brown scholar Ethan Monreal Jackson, Spira Capital is your fractional C-suite. Whether you're a startup or a venture firm, a freelancer, or a family office, Spira Capital gives you the scale, support, and stability to grow. Stop worrying about stuff like bookkeeping, accounting, FP&A, operations, HR, payroll and benefits, or your international workforce. Let Spira Capital run those for you so you can run your business. To learn more, visit spiracapital.co. That's C-O. Welcome to The Value of One, The Power of All, a podcast created by the Ron Brown Scholar Program. Since 1996, this organization has been investing in the next generation of African American leaders. And this podcast highlights the stories of the people that make this program special. I'm your host, Ray Pryor, 2015 Ron Brown Scholar. And in this season, presented by the Ron Brown Venture Lab, we're highlighting founders in our alumni network who are changing the world through innovation and entrepreneurship. We'll dive into their personal upbringings and backgrounds, the origins of their ideas, and the successes and challenges they've had along the way. Today, I'm excited to share my conversation with Jay Lundy, 2005 Ron Brown Scholar, and the Managing Director of NAACP Capital. I want to spend a big bulk of our conversation talking about NAACP Capital and your work, and certainly would like to nerd out a bit in the venture world with you. But I think to paint the context for how it came to be and how you came to lead it, let's start a little bit earlier. We were just chatting, and you kind of described this as the culmination of a lot of different things that you've been building throughout your life, from teenager, maybe even before that, to now. When you kind of think of the most pivotal experiences or people or organizations that helped shape you to want to take on this role, but what are some of those things that come to mind?
Yeah, right. So first off, it's a pleasure to be chatting with you, and just so impressed with everything you're doing and building to support, both the entrepreneurial and venture ecosystems and beyond. My journey, it's interesting because it's been non-linear, but in a great way. It's been a story that really starts in a kind of a normal-ish town in Florida with a loving family, 6 siblings. But what was really, really important in how I grew up was the examples and models that I saw with my parents, with my grandparents, and many people around me. My grandfather was a civic leader, had a church and a soup kitchen. He also got baseball for Black kids into our community. He was an advocate for clean water and really forced conversations about equity, equality, and access. My father, in a lot of ways, did some of the same things and has built a legacy around workforce development in my community, helping people find new jobs, upskill, reskill, which is really interesting in an age now where we talk about the need to upskill, reskill with AI. My father was doing this, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, helping people figure out how to find new opportunities after a hurricane in Florida or after a new plant came or left town. And my mother worked for the Department of Children and Families in Florida, helping to oversee the foster care system, and was an advocate for kids. And now has opened up a set of early education centers that provide high quality enrichment in school for kids as young as 6 weeks. So these are important because I grew up where it was normalized to think about service, to think about how to professionally impact your communities. And I went to college, and as you might expect, I was a government major because for me, what I saw meant policy, government, community engagement, and I had an experience after my first year where I saw a lot of my friends coming back from New York and coming back from banking. And I didn't really know what investment banking was or what capital market tools were, but I learned very quickly. And the next summer, I went and worked on an investment banking rotational program and saw the power of finance and capitalism. And to fast forward a bit, my career has included a lot of really interesting things. I taught high school in New York City right after college. I worked on a political campaign. I've worked at a nonprofit and impact investing role, went to grad school, in consulting for 6 years, worked at a couple of family offices, and got to invest in ways to support underserved communities. And those experiences growing up with examples of impact and service combined with, over 10 years of consulting, working with big companies, working with family offices and allocating on behalf of principals that helped me understand that there were two sides that weren't talking perfectly. There was the community side where you could have big impact from the ledge of policy, service, advocacy, but this massive engine of capitalism, which could move money in markets, but oftentimes missed and overlooked that very community that needed it most. And in this new role that I have now, building NAACP Capital, the ethos of the fund is to combine those two, use the principles of capitalism, namely innovation, technology, entrepreneurship, to find, support, and scale solutions that are great for underserved communities across healthcare, across access to capital, across education, and across climate in ways that can really move the needle. So that's a long answer, but that really is how the experiences on the personal side were critically important to how and why I've got to where I am now.
Yeah, so it was a great framing, and appreciate you doing so. A decent amount of things that we have in common. As you were talking about the work that your grandfather did in educating the community around new jobs and new technology. My grandfather here in Chicago did a lot of that same work as well. So took an interest in government and public policy in college. Also taught right after school, and since and been inspired by this combination that you're describing, which is why hearing that you're going to lead this initiative was super exciting. You also talked about the role that Ron Brown played. Certainly, as it's played for a lot of fellow scholars like ourselves early on. Anything in particular that kind of stood out to you of the mission or the ethos or the spirit of the program that you think has carried you throughout your career?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So Ron Brown, both as a person and the program was really important. I remember, applying for colleges, thinking about how I would finance, my family would finance college, and applying for some of the prominent scholarship programs. And Ron Brown was obviously one of those. But I was really excited because I fell in love with the story of Ron Brown and what he had done for his passing as Commerce Secretary and the first that he had accomplished as a Black leader and cabinet secretary. So for me, it's really funny. That was over 20 years ago that I was selected and in DC for selection weekend, March of 2005. But it is so interesting that, 20 years from now, in a lot of ways, I'm in a role that connects very directly to, you know, Ron Brown and his story and his impact. Moving beyond that, the program was phenomenal for a couple of things. For me, I got my scholarship from Harvard, and I was able to use the Ron Brown scholarship money to really um, buy textbooks, to live and have expenses covered that allowed me to take advantage of being at a place like Harvard. And the reason that's important is I was very, very fortunate not to have 2 or 3 jobs as an 18-year-old at Harvard, work at the library. I didn't have to supplement whatever my parents could provide to live comfortably as a student. I was able to use some of the Ron Brown funds to have some money in my pocket to get meals with other students, to have textbooks, to fly home. And that's really, really important because at a place like Harvard, the networks you develop don't always happen in the classroom, but happen in the things that happen outside the classroom. They happen when you're going to a football game or sports match. They happen when you're getting a beer at a bar. They happen when you're taking a trip. And for a long time, and today even, a lot of students of color or students with different economic backgrounds have to trade out of those things to have the jobs to pay their way through school. I was very lucky that I didn't have to do that. And that allowed me to build some relationships with people, build some networks that are very powerful now that have helped me tremendously in my career. So that's one of those things that isn't talked about a lot. When I think about the Ron Brown impact, it's the Ron Brown community, and I talk to that community often. It's powerful. It's a network that consists of brothers and sisters and mentors and champions and mentees at this point. But the other thing that I really got out of it was an ability to have the financial freedom to lean into a place like Harvard in a way that typically only those who come from great means can do. And that has enabled me to have a network that truly is second to none. I'm not saying that as a flex. I'm saying that because of this scholarship program, I was able to um, lean in and do some things that very few get to do and build some relationships that are well beyond the academic benefits of Harvard.
Well said, and certainly something that I resonate with as well in my experience is this concept of the privileged poor, and it essentially describes exactly what you said, that getting into a place like Harvard is one thing, but getting to fully experience Harvard without being hamstringed by all of the things that the school doesn't directly bill you for. You just come out a very different person with a very different network, a very different set of experiences, and Ron Brown certainly unlocks that for a lot of us, which is great. So shifting a bit to the work you're doing now, as you know, I launched the venture lab here at Ron Brown, and supports founders and investors in our community, and it's been able to back some startups from our alumni as well. And so I've been sitting in this combination of thinking about startups and venture and capital, but also in the framework of a nonprofit that has a strong history and community impact. So watching you and hearing the announcement of NAACP Capital has been very inspiring for me to see. Tell us a little bit about how this idea came to be. What was the oldest civil rights organization in America doing or thinking about as it relates to venture, as opposed to all of the other things that they could have been thinking and doing, however many years ago this idea first started getting kicked around?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there really are some great people who incubated and conceptualized this. And I think, I give them all the flowers because without them, I'm not here. So as you pointed out, NAACP, 116-year civil rights organization, has been at the forefront of economic, housing, education reform through and through. And several years ago, there were some conversations about can the NAACP play a larger role in supporting what was happening with the lack of funding to Black fund managers. And this conversation was between Derek Johnson, the president of the NAACP, and Brian Dixon, the partner and managing director of Spira Capital. And along with him, Frida and Mitch Kapor, who have supported more diverse and women GPs than anyone out there. They have truly been champions and allies for diversity in tech and entrepreneurship. Mitch founded Lotus 123, which for some of the younger listeners may not know, but really modernized business computing. It had been investors in not just emerging funds led by Black, brown, and women GPs, but also some of the biggest technology companies, Uber, et cetera. So between those folks, as well as some really prominent GPs of some other funds, they incubated this, had conversations, met on a regular basis to conceptualize what this was. And that's really where I stepped in, got the opportunity to take this idea, this concept, and really take the next steps to build it out. And that's what we're doing now. And really thinking about how do we build a strategy that leverages what the NAACP does and its impact in communities, and leverage that to drive a type of mission-aligned impact around closing gaps in underserved communities, ensuring the best technology solutions reach underserved communities, and ultimately drive the type of positive change and transformation we want to see in our community. So that's the reason why this is happening, and that's a little bit about kind of where this is starting from.
A lot has changed in the world since the original conception of it was just in tech and venture in the world generally. I don't know that AI was as prominent as a mover in the world as when these conversations started. Certainly, some of the challenges in the venture ecosystem and the tech ecosystem at large may not have existed in the same way. Have any of the kind of macro trends that are influencing things now changed anything about the strategy or how you're thinking about it? I assume that's your job to figure out after they set the ship out to water how to steer it to make sure it lands where you want it to be.
Exactly.
But I imagine maybe the job that you thought you were taking and the context you thought you were taking might be very different than what today feels like.
Yeah. The world has certainly shifted since I started. And one of
Yeah.
the first things I did in this job was attend the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, where Vice President Harris was accepting the nomination. Politics aside, you can only imagine how different the outlook was at that moment than where we are now. However, what's been really important, and even in that moment, was developing a strategy that would be resilient to any political setting, any market conditions. And that really also reflects the NAACP. It's an organization that has had to thrive and survive across blue and red administrations, across bear and bull markets, across inflationary and non-inflationary periods. You really look and think about all the possible geopolitical, national conditions, and it's had to be an organization that could do great things and advocate for communities. So, in a lot of ways, while the context of the environments, both politically and certainly from an economic and market condition have shifted, the strategy is largely the same. And that's because the strategy was always focused on let's invest in the best ideas, no matter who has those ideas, no matter what your background is, that are good for underrepresented and overlooked communities. So you don't have to be a Black entrepreneur or fund manager to be something that we would invest. We want people, regardless of what their background is, how they look, who are doing things that are great for underserved, underrepresented communities to be the things that we get excited to invest in. So that approach is largely resilient to the economic, political, social conditions and currents that we see now. And while it's certainly a challenging environment, especially as we enter the fundraising phase, it's an environment where investors focused on driving positive impact that is also, in my mind, the highest value differentiated alpha way to invest. You talked about AI. We will invest in a lot of AI tools, but the tools we're looking to invest in are trying to solve really hard problems. Really hard problems are hard, but if you can solve them, have massive, massive economic and profit opportunities. So we see this as an opportunity to fix some really hard problems, but in doing so, make a ton of money. So this really is appealing to a lot of the investors that we're talking to who certainly want to see a better world for the communities that are Black, brown, but also all communities, but also want to do it in a way that's sustainable, scalable, and can have engines of economic prosperity to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Walk me through a little bit about the original announcement of wanting to raise $200 million for fund of funds. What was the thinking around that fund size, that strategy? It sounds like maybe a little bit of it was that of the many problems that NAACP was trying to figure out how y'all could have an impact, supporting underrepresented GPs was a big part of that. So that would make sense. But certainly the vision is bigger than that. Yeah, maybe just for the venture nerds in the room, can you share us a little bit about some of the why behind some of those numbers and the strategy as you're thinking about it now?
Yep. So one of the things that was really important is you see a lot of funds that tend to be subscale. So when you're a small fund, a $20 million fund, a $10 million fund, unless you've got partners that can support you operationally, it becomes really hard to hire the sufficient resources you need to operate your fund. And there are ways to get around that, but in general, it's hard without infrastructure and partners and access to the best lawyers, the best banking partners, the best fund admin, et cetera. So what we've been able to really do is think about what is a sufficient fund size that allows us to, on one hand, just have a scaled, institutionalized team and set of resources. The other thing was we also wanted to be able to support funds indirect. We'll also invest directly into companies. It's become more of a hybrid strategy. We wanted to be able to write sufficient checks because if you can write a big enough check, then if you are investing in a fund, you can have a seat on a fund's LPAC, which is basically its leadership committee, and help govern and have influence over how the fund operates, different ways it invests, et cetera. And the same thing for a company. You can get a board seat. You can influence how a company grows, key hires, et cetera. So it was really, really important for us to say, given what we bring to the table, this vantage point, access to policy, access to the Black community through the NAACP, access to policy and advocacy, it was really important that we have a position where we can leverage that and we can help founders in an incentivized way with the resources we have. But that requires a big enough check size. So when we thought about portfolio construction and having both the resources for our team, but also the cash to write big enough checks and then follow on, it led to a number that was, $200 million. And look, it's a very tough fundraising environment. Not everyone reaches that target, but we feel very optimistic about our path there and also the need to be a scaled entity and platform so that we can properly support companies and funds in ways that we know could actually help them and not just be a small silent check on the sidelines that doesn't have the incentive to support in ways that we know how to support.
Yeah, it would feel a bit disingenuous or not in the spirit of the legacy of the NAACP overall, not to want to build a formidable platform in the way that you described. You mentioned it a little bit. Certainly money is an important aspect of the value you hope to provide to the ecosystem. As you said, an organization that's over a century old and there's barely any corners of the country or even the world that it doesn't reach. How are you all thinking about all of the other value that you're able to offer to the GPs that you back, to the founders that you're supporting? I'm just thinking about the value proposition that having NAACP Capital as a partner, I think is pretty differentiated from most other LPs and investors that the founders may come across.
Nope, exactly right. So I think that's the thing that I get excited about because, when you think about what a lot of investors bring to the table, it may be operational experience, it may be industry expertise, it may be, a specific network. And on average, there are fewer investors that bring the type of things that the NAACP has access to, which includes, I talked about Uber earlier. I have no position in Uber whatsoever. But when you think about how a company like Uber, maybe Lyft, Airbnb, really any company in a regulated industry, which is a lot of companies, they have to get clearance from some body being an entity to operate. So in Uber's case, when they were getting started in going to Miami, someone had to meet with the Taxi and Limousine Commission to advocate for why Uber needed to be in that market. Or Airbnb has to talk to a hospitality group or a labor union to convince them to allow Airbnb to be in a market. Those type of conversations and the people who sit in those roles are the type of people that an organization like NAACP has direct access to. The connections to labor unions is immense. The connections to local leadership, directly and indirectly, is immense. So that's one lane where there's some really, really unique value that we can provide that moves the needle for companies and companies within a fund in some really, really direct ways. The other thing is really this access to this trust and credibility. If I were to see NAACP on a cap table or as an LP in a fund, I'm going to think, okay, this is something that, should be able to leverage the trust and the standing of this organization, may be able to develop some commercialization opportunities with that segment. NAACP has image awards. There's a convention every year in different cities. It was in Charlotte this year. It's in Chicago next year. There's entrepreneurs on stages that get to pitch. There's an opportunity to say, look, portfolio company XYZ, you've got a captive group of 5,000-6,000 people who could be good, sticky customers, especially if your product or service is good for them. It's solving healthcare disparities. It's dealing with climate resiliency. It's providing access to capital. So there are some really, really specific things. And of course, we have great access. So I've been able to start to build a really robust network of fractional talent, of, fund support, whether it's banks, lawyers, et cetera, that will offer discounted fees to our portfolio. That stuff's great. That's some of the stuff that other funds already do. We have to think about what are the unique things that we can do that really no one else can do at a scale we can, that we can bring to the table. And we've been able to articulate those things. And I'll tell you, GPs, founders are excited because they know that we can provide those things, but they also know that we can be additive to a cap table and help their raises outside of just what we do. But we can be used as a point of, oh my gosh, we have this group on our cap table that will help us get to the next investor we're looking at.
Yeah, that's well said. All of those are things that certainly will move the needle. And what I like how as you described it, it's not taking NAACP and all of its history and trying to force it into the cookie cutter new fund box, but rather identifying the assets and strengths that it already has. And with the supercharge of capital, with the model of venture, what more can you already do with what you have? And certainly you can build on top of that foundation too. And so it's given me a lot of great framing for how we're thinking about things at the venture lab as well. And what you just described, it seems obvious to me the types of founders that you are going to attract and the types of people that you will want to work with, both founders and investors. We're not talking about the next cute, you know, app that gets invented and then, these are things that require a lot of passion and effort and time and a lot of people all coordinated around a vision that folks will need to unify us on. Folks are going back and forth in the venture community around this consensus versus non-consensus discussion about investing and whether it's, is it great to always do consensus investing and invest in things that other people are going to fund and want to back and things get competitive, or do you always want to be looking for the things that nobody else is thinking about? What's your kind of stance on that as you think about NAACP Capital that doesn't sound like it's trying to be any other venture fund, or it isn't
No,
try't to be like anybody
absolutely not.
else?
We certainly are willing to go in the direction that we have conviction over.
Yeah,
I think that outperformance comes from looking in different directions. It comes from going where others aren't going. And of course, there will be things that make sense to do, but we're leaving an era of venture where really the 2, 3 years ago, where term sheets were flying around. Some of the biggest investors that I won't call out that we know were giving insane term sheets based on FOMO. And the thing is, if you've got a $400 or $500 million fund or $5, $6 billion fund, you can do that. You can swing around like that. But
yeah,
when you are, in many cases, a black or brown or underrepresented manager, money matters. And doing things that you don't have conviction over, not you believe there's consensus on, but you individually have done the diligence and have conviction over, that becomes problematic. The other thing for us is we just have a very strong point of view in terms of what we think is critical. So the discipline we have to have is, making sure that the deals that we get excited about and the managers we get excited about are going to not just have returns, but deliver the impact outcomes that we want to see. We will not compromise just to have a company that is growing fast, has a pipeline of clients and customers, but isn't doing anything that's actually good for the communities we care about.
yeah.
So that's going to be a good measure to make sure that we stick to our conviction and we invest where we know founders and GPs will be able to deliver on what we think is important that needs to happen in the world.
Yeah, yeah, but have had to run into a decent amount of headwinds as it relates to this fundraising journey, from just the economic climate to the political climate, and certainly you have the backing of an institution has seen it all. When it comes to the partners that you are conversing with, that you want to back, the folks who want to back the fund, are you finding that those LPs are folks who are kind of tried and true folks who know venture well and are excited about a differentiated approach and a new player coming in to achieve a different level of impact, both financially and otherwise? Or are you finding that there are LPs who are perhaps new to the venture ecosystem or new to this flavor of investing and the thesis that you have, that are excited about jumping into it for the first time, or just kind of in the early stages of their own portfolio with you?
That's a great question. It's kind of been a bit of both. And I think it's been the nuance I would say is it's been folks who are veteran investors, foundations, established family offices who are mission aligned. Those are folks that we're having some really good traction with. But we are also very importantly focused on bringing new people into this. And this is where another mission of ours is not just investing and allocating into things that make our community better, but also making sure that the people who have access to a promising fund are diversified. Like we want to make sure that different communities have access to invest. When you think about some of the investment rules and restrictions, we've created a private investing market that is very controlled when you think about accredited investors. But if I want to go and put all my money in public markets, I can go to Robinhood, I can go to public.com, I can, create an E-Trade account and kind of dump everything there. However, I can't invest into a startup that I'm excited about. So that's a longer conversation. And that's one that does get political really quickly as to why some of those things exist. And there also certainly are some potential regulatory changes on the horizon there. But in light of that, our job is to say, look, we want to make sure that this opportunity is in front of investors who are both established investors who care about things like this, but also investors that typically don't get access. Increasingly, those are, Black, brown folks. Those are women. Those are folks from different backgrounds. Those are folks who maybe are in different careers versus professional investors. And there'll be smaller checks, but it's the responsibility we have to put in the time and the resources, create the structures with our lawyers to allow us to open doors to those communities and create moments for wealth creation or underserved communities, as well as investing in those communities.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Value of One, The Power of All, a podcast created by the Ron Brown Scholar Program, presented by the Ron Brown Venture Lab, and sponsored by Spira Capital. If you want to hear more inspiring conversations like this one, don't forget to click subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And to learn more about the organization, check us out at ronbrown.org.